Abbington Pickets, January 1915. The days are long and nights are extremely bitter. We take turns doing night duty. Everyone dreads it when it's their turn. It rains more often than not, but enough about that. I miss you, Abigail, more than words can say. I think about our baby, a little boy or little girl. I'm thrilled for either, and I know our child will be beautiful like his or her mother. Abigail! Sounded a voice from outside the general store. Abigail looked up from the letter she was reading. Who was hollering like a banshee? The curly-haired brunette wondered, as she quickly folded and tucked the piece of paper into her floral apron pocket. Abigail had a beautiful poise, and her wavy locks set off the loosely held bun piled on her crown. The ankle-length floral tone-on-tone burgundy dress swished as she moved. Wishing she could still be reading Jacob's letter, she walked toward the door. Are you here? The sound became clearer as it neared the inside of the building. Abigail! What is it? Abigail met her sister-in-law in the doorway. The frantic look on her face gave Abigail a scare. What's wrong, Jane? Abigail grasped Jane's upper arms with both hands. The coat she wore was slightly big for her and hung down to her knees, revealing the gray dress underneath. Jane's mousy-colored hair, usually in a tight, neat bun, was falling out of place with strands of hair that fell down on either side of her face. Her naturally serious expression was even more stern. Not only was Abigail startled by her sister-in-law's appearance, she was even more surprised she was here in Abbington Pickets, since it was quite a long drive from Crocus Flats. It was also wintertime, and Claude, her husband, usually did the shopping in the cold weather. I just came from Doc's, Jane gasped, trying to catch her breath. Come, sit down. Abigail led her toward the chair beside the tea table in the corner of the general store. It was where Abigail sat with all the ladies who came for tea and biscuits while she worked at the store, which was the majority of her time. With Jacob gone to war, she had to keep busy, and besides, the village needed her. She supplied all the space needed to store the items sent to the men at war. She wanted to do all she could for the war effort so her Jacob could come back home safely. She wanted him to be proud of her. She wanted to show him that she could handle everything at home while he was gone. She did have help when she needed it. Charles's father, Mr. Edwards, stopped in every day to see if she needed anything or to make sure she was all right. In fact, everyone who knew Jacob called in to check on his wife. Everyone in the village knew how Jacob had struggled for the life he had, and the fact that he had to leave his beautiful Abigail with child to serve his country was heartbreaking. Abigail sat across from Jane. She leaned over toward her. Now, what is it? Abigail asked. Have you calmed down enough to tell me what it is? Jane took a deep breath and closed her eyes. It was obvious she didn't want to make eye contact with Abigail. It was as though she was ashamed and angry at the same time. I'm going to have a baby, Jane blurted out matter-of-factly. Well, that's great news, Abigail threw her hands in the air. No, it's not, Jane stared at her. Of course it is, Abigail insisted, trying to make her feel better, knowing full well the way she felt when she found out that she was expecting. I can't be a mother. Why not? Abigail's happiness turned to confusion. I'm not ready to be a mother, Jane stated. We're not ready to be parents. Jane's blotchy red face frowned with wrinkles across her forehead. The all-too-familiar feeling crept up inside Abigail, tingling the tips of her nerve endings as if they were lightning bolts. Abigail silently recalled the day she learned she was expecting. It was a cloudy morning in September, right after their 3rd anniversary, and soon after she found out Jacob wanted to join the army. When she began vomiting, she thought she had influenza. Each day she woke up with the same thing. Not wanting to worry Jacob, she hid it well, but finally took a walk down to see Doc, who revealed the shocking surprise that she was with child. I can't have children, she exasperated. I can assure you, Miss Abigail, Doc replied. You can, you are. What am I going to say to Jacob? She panicked. I mean, never mind. Remembering with whom she was speaking, at the same time remembering the conversation she had so seriously with Jacob about not having children. Truth was, she did want to have children. She didn't want to have to tell her love, the one whom she was about to marry, that she couldn't have children. Abigail thought she couldn't conceive. When she went back to England to marry Patrick, she got measles, and because she was already in her teens, the doctor told her it was very unlikely that she could ever have children. Abigail would rather tell Jacob she didn't want to have children than to admit she couldn't. It was like admitting that she wasn't a real woman or a complete woman. It broke her heart to see the look on Jacob's face when she told him that she didn't want to have a family. Abigail knew it was the best thing to do. If only she could explain that to him now. Instead, she had to write it in a letter, telling him he was going to be a father and when he was on his way to war, no less. Oh, if only she could see his face, touch his hand, feel his strong arms wrapped around her right now. She looked down at her swollen belly. Abigail rubbed both her hands over her round front. Oh, Jacob, how I miss you, she thought. Abigail! A sharp voice shook her into the present. Are you even listening to me? Jane waved her hand in front of her face. Of course, Abigail answered, as if what a thing to say. I'm listening. Well then, she asked. Well what? Abigail looked confused. How am I going to tell Claude? He will be thrilled, Abigail assured her. Believe me, every man wants to have children with the woman he loves. Are you sure? Jane was still not convinced. Mark my words, Abigail confidently informed her as she patted Jane on the shoulder. Claude's shirt will be bursting at the seams. She imagined how Jacob looked when he read the letter Abigail wrote him. She knew he would be grinning from ear to ear and would give him that much more to live for. She wished she could have been a fly on the wall at the time. I hope you're right, Jane frowned. I know I am, Abigail added. Now, this isn't making a baby a new dress or mending the old one. She grabbed the broom and began to sweep, trying to cover up the tears welling up in her eyes. What? Jane looked confused. What baby? What clothes? You don't have a baby yet. It's an expression, Jane. My grandma always used to say it, Abigail laughed. You know, when you're not doing any work and you should be. Oh, Jane shook her head. Now, you better fix yourself, Abigail scolded. Here comes your husband now. Abigail could see the top of Claude's head as he walked toward the general store. He must be finished at the blacksmith's shop. Jane wiped her tears with a white hanky she pulled out of her pocket, then patted her hair on each side above her ears, feeling it to make sure it was in place. Don't worry, Abigail hugged her. Everything will be all right. God is in charge, and he doesn't make mistakes. Thanks, Abigail, Jane half smiled. I can always count on you. Of course you can, Abigail grinned. She did wish that the burden of carrying a baby and looking after the general store was something she didn't have to do alone. But she knew God was with her, and she wasn't alone as long as she had faith in him. And since Jacob left, she had decided that looking after the general store and living in the home quarters of it would be easier than keeping up two places in the cold, hard winter. She closed up Jacob's big place and brought the belongings she would need while Jacob was away. It was hard keeping two fires burning, and this way, when deliveries came to the store, she was always there. This always made it easier for the drop-offs for the war effort as well. Bonjour! Claude walked through the doorway as he took off his hat. He nodded to Abigail and smiled brightly at Jane, as though she were the only one in the room. Are you ready to go, mon petit chou? Claude asked. I am, Jane said certainly, as she brushed her dress downward with both hands. She quickly glanced at Abigail. What does that mean? Abigail whispered. I don't know, Jane smiled, leaning in close to Abigail, but I love it, she blushed. Claude walked closer to them and held out his arm to Jane. She slipped her arm in his and they began to walk out the doorway. It was lovely to see you, Abigail called out after them. Jane turned her head and lightly smiled back at her, as a communication to the secret that they both now shared. Abigail continued to sweep the floor, humming the familiar tune she loved as a child. London Bridge is falling down. She thought about the man in Claude when Jacob and she first met him. He had a chip on his shoulder and a bitterness in his heart. Abigail's heart warmed as she thought of the man he had turned out to be and how he loved Jane and doted on her endlessly. She noticed a horse-drawn sleigh that pulled up. She walked over to the white four-pane window and watched her father carefully climb out of the sleigh, then turn back around to help the mother out. To her surprise, he reached into the back of the sleigh and pulled out a leather suitcase. What's going on? Abigail wondered to herself. She reached the door before her parents and waited for them to approach. Well, this is a surprise, Abigail exclaimed as she opened the door for her ma and pa. Abigail, you are radiant, her mama gushed as she reached forward to hug her. You have so much color in your cheeks and look even more beautiful. Her mother still looked concerned. Abigail hugged her father as well. What's with the suitcase? She questioned. Well, dear, her mama looked at her, you will need someone here with you sooner or later. You see, Abigail, her father interrupted, your mother has been worrying herself sick. About what? Abigail shook her head with confusion. I'm fine. You're going to have a baby soon, her mother pointed out. Not until April, Abigail argued. Well, it's January, honey, her mama continued. You shouldn't be lifting anything. Besides, anything could happen. You need your mama, her father added, or your mama needs you, he grinned. Mr. Edwards checks in every day, Abigail explained, and so does half the village, she laughed. Oh, Mama, Abigail hugged her ma. I am grateful for your help. But what about Pa? What's he going to do without you for 3 months? Don't worry about him, dear, her mama winked. Your Aunt Gladys has everything under control. Just let your mama help you out, her father finally stated. It will be good for both of you. Well, it sure will make the nights a little less lonely, Abigail admitted. But I have been working on a little baby quilt, and that keeps me busy. You shouldn't be lifting anything right now anyway, Pa glanced at her. I feel great, Pa. Abigail did adjust to pregnancy well. Once the morning sickness stopped, she felt good and recently had more energy than usual. And I don't lift anything anyhow, she said. Mr. Edwards has been more helpful with that, believe me. In fact, everyone in the village has been wonderful to me. I don't want you wearing yourself out, Mama looked sternly at her daughter. You worry too much, Abigail smiled. Now, let's have some tea. And that's the end of chapter 1. Now, what do you think is going to happen? I don't know. So, thank you. So a lot of the references there, you probably noticed that you didn't know what was going on with Claude and how he came to be and how he was very bitter when he first came, which means you have to read the first 2 books. So hopefully that gives you an insight into letters from Jacob. Anything else, Corinne, that we need to